So we want to handle this button click event. Well, we need some tools or some components to be able to do that successfully. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of model classes for our project, and these model classes will model two things. It'll model a sales order, which will be kind of like a collective thing, like an invoice, if you want to think of it that way. And then we'll have sales items, which will be individual items within that order. So to do that, we're going to create some classes. Now, these classes are the exact same conceptually as what you probably have done previously in C#, or you're doing C# right now, what you've done previously in Java. So to start off, I like to keep things a little organized within my application. So I'm going to right click on my project, and I'm going to go add, and I'm going to add a new folder, and I'm going to call this my models folder. Now the folder is simply there for organization. It has no bearing on your code and how it functions. It's just there to help keep things organized. So inside of models, I'm going to right click again, add, and I'm going to add a class. And I'm going to choose class at the very top, and I'm going to give it a name down here at the bottom. And I'm going to call it a sales order. So Visual Studio scaffolded out for me a basic class. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my class is public. And inside of my sales order, I'm going to have some basic information. I'll probably have things like a date time for order created. Now, inside of Java, you basically have fields, and then you have getters and setters. Well, in C# you have the same thing, but your getters and setters aren't actually methods. There's an actual construct called a property that allows you to create an inline getter or setter. So let's talk about that for a minute. So this order created, I'm going to go ahead and just so I can differentiate and say this is a private. So I'm going to put an underscore, and now that's a notation of my own to use the underscore. That just helps me know that this is a private variable. So the keyword private actually says that it's hidden. And what that means is that this variable cannot be seen when I create an instance of this object. I can't see this property or this variable. So let me kind of demonstrate that for you real fast. Let's go back to the form. And I'm going to go back to my add order. So the first thing I want to do here is I'm going to create a sales order object. And I'll call it SO equals new sales order. Now I need to bring in a using statement in order to get this to work. So we'll talk more about that in a minute, but all that you need to do to make that happen is you'll want to see this little light bulb. You'll want to click on that and say using CP first Windows app.models. And what that'll do is it'll add a using statement up here to the very top of our code. And that brings in what's referred to as a namespace. And that's where sales order lives. So we now have a reference to it. But what I want to show you is how, how this order created is hidden because of this private keyword. So if I go SO dot, that dot notation, just like in Java, will give you a list of all the members. And those members can be properties, public fields, methods, or events attached to your class. And for me, I have no public members because the only property or field that I have is this order created, and it's private. And because it's private, I can't see it here. If I wanted to make it visible, I could change it from private to public. And when I flip back to my other class, which is my form, I can now see that see order created because I made it public. So that gives me some control as to, should this really be public? Should it be private? Should I make it read-only? Because right now, because it's a field, I cannot make it read-only. It's basically freely read and writable. So I'm going to make it private. And then what I'm going to do underneath it is I'm going to create another property, or I'm going to create a property definition. I'm going to say public, date, time, order created. And then I'm going to use curly brackets. Now, because I'm placing curly brackets here, notice there's no parentheses up before it. It's just curly brackets. I'm creating a property definition. So properties have get and set routines very similar to what you would have seen in your Java code when you create getters and setters. The difference here is that the syntax is different and that this is not a method. This is actually called a property. So the getter has basically just simple syntax. It's a return statement, and we're going to return order created. The setter is similar. So we're going to say order created equals, and then value becomes a key word inside of the setter. So value is whatever value the property gets set to. So when someone says so dot order created equals and then sets a date and time value, that value ends up here and then ultimately gets stored in order created. So now if we come back to our form, we say so dot. Now our icon has changed and so is our notation. So now it's order created. This is the property that has that get and set functionality. So now from here we could say order created equals new, or we could actually just do one better. We can just say date time, and it has some statics, date time dot now, semicolon. And what that'll do for us is it'll say order created equals whatever the date and time is right now. So that's pretty nice. So let's go ahead and kind of flush out the rest of the sales order. So what other things do we need in a sales order? There's probably an order number. So we can add a public, let's see, we'll make those an integer and we'll say order number. Now, instead of doing a private field and then a public property, I can actually do, with the help of some C# notation, is I can actually do an inline property, and I can just go like this. So now order number becomes the name of my property. There's no private field. Well, there is a private field, but I don't have to declare one. What happens is the compiler will actually look at this line of code and it will automatically create for me private int order number. And it will generate the similar getters and setters for this order number property. You never see the underscore order number, and you don't really have to. You just deal with this property itself, and you don't worry about the private field. So you'll see for the remainder that most of my public properties will have this type of syntax. On the occasion where you need to have greater control over what's happening, you still have the ability to use the full property syntax with the full get and set. So we'll have an order number. Let's see. So we have date created, order number, and I think that's really it for right now. It's very simplistic. This is just a very quick and dirty kind of class. But let's go ahead and we're going to need to create a second class. So models, right click, add class, and this will be a sales order item. So again, we have to make that public. So again, think about these classes and what are they there to represent? They're there to represent nouns in a use case scenario. So what we're talking about doing is we have an application that's going to act like a point of sale system. So you could think of this as it's a mom and pop shop on the corner. They sell some items and they're trying to go through that checkout process quickly and efficiently. So what they're wanting to do is be able to type in the name of the product, the unit price. You know what? We can actually add another box here. And we can add a quantity. Does that make sense that you may want to include the quantity of the order? So we'll put a label right here, and we'll change its text value to be quantity. And we'll align that accordingly. So now we can just quickly type in the name of the product, the price, the quantity, and hit add to order. And then this will be a list of the current order. So you see how this kind of evolves as we think through it and the process of what's needed. So each one of those sales order items will have a product name, a price, and a quantity. So let's jump back to sales order item and let's just add product name as one of our properties. There's also some shorthand functionality called snippets where you can say propt double tab. And then we can put in here a float, and we can say price. So the float is a decimal data type. Prop, and then we have a unit. So int, we'll use an unsigned int, so uint. and this will be the quantity. Now I use an unsigned int because you can't have negative quantity. That just doesn't make any sense. So we'll go ahead and hit enter there. So now we've created this object with these three properties. These properties match up with the input values on our form. So we now have our sales order items. So the one last thing that we need to do is, now we have a sales order. We have items that go on a sales order, but how do we relate the two together? So back on sales order, I'm going to create another property, and it's going to be a list. Now within C#, we have what are called generics, and a lot of your collections are generic types. And all that really means is that you can create collections that are strongly typed, and strongly typed means that it can be of a specific class or a specific object. So in this case, I'm going to say I want a list of sales order item, and these will be my order items. And I'll make a property out of that, just the same as I did order number. And what this will allow me to do is I can then create one sales order. I can then start adding, I can create sales order items, and then I can add those sales order items to the order items property off of the order. And actually, I'm going to make this a little clearer. I'm going to drop the order piece. It seems a little redundant. So on my sales order, I have a collection of items. So this will give me the functionality I need in order to create an order, create items for that order, and then add those items to the sales order, ultimately being able to say, here's the total cost, and ring someone out, hypothetically. So the next step is actually starting to wire up some of this functionality and get it working.